concept, and I was very excited to be invited to participate with you today. So today I was asked to think about what social networks are going to mean in the next 10 years. And I think that's a daunting task, because if we look back 10 years ago, the term social networks meant something completely different than what it means today, right? In 2002, 10 years ago, Facebook didn't exist, Twitter didn't exist, Tumblr didn't exist, LinkedIn didn't exist. When we wanted to network, we collected business cards, right? And we'd jot down information, we would go to community events, and not to say that's not valuable anymore and that there isn't a place for that, but when we say social networking, we mean something very different today. Okay. So today, our job is to forecast into the future, and that's a little bit daunting, right? Few of us 10 years ago would have been able to imagine the scope or influence that social networking now has on our personal and professional lives. While there are certainly, over the next 10 years, there will be new platforms, and our current platforms will modify and will change, and some will no longer be useful, one thing remains certain. Social networking will continue to influence how we connect and how we communicate, and will evolve to mean different things. So today I want to explore how social networks will continue to influence how we connect with others, and second, what are the implications for communication? In particular, I study communication within organizations, so you will see that kind of tinting my presentation today. So first, this concept of connecting with others. Okay, and I have 3 points I'd like to touch on here. First, the value of social networks in maintaining relationships. We have kind of a mixed audience here today, but I think majority of you are college students. When you look at your Facebook friend list, I would imagine that you have a mix of those individuals that you have met in college and those individuals that you were acquainted with in high school, right? You are in a much different position than I was when I was in high school, or when I was in an undergraduate in college, right? I had moved on from most of my high school friends. I didn't have contact with them. I looked forward to seeing them at our 10-year reunion, but those links weren't there anymore. You have a unique opportunity to maintain those relationships, right? Maybe not talking on the phone every day, but certainly keeping up with what is going on in people's lives, what they're doing professionally. One-time meetings can turn into lifetime connections now, right? Perhaps people you meet with today, you'll friend on Facebook, or you'll become a LinkedIn contact with them. You'll have an extended relationship with them besides this moment. Okay? And this brings us to the second point, the importance of weak ties, the importance of maintaining those relationships, not just because of the relationship itself, but also because of the relationships that makes possible for you, right? So if we become acquaintances, all of a sudden you have access to my network also, right? I can put you in touch with the people that I know, and this becomes very important for us professionally. So it's the old adage, it's not what you know, but who you know. That's expanded now, right? How many of you have heard about the 6 degrees of separation to Kevin Bacon, right? Over the next 10 years, that's shrinking, right? Our 6 degrees of separation is getting smaller. Okay. Third point about connecting is that we're expected to be connected, and this is going to grow even more over the next 10 years, this expectation. How many of you have heard of the term cyber vetting? A few of you. So cyber vetting is before organizations, when they were hiring new employees, they would contact your references, right? Now they have access to much more information about you, okay? And we'll talk about some of the implications about that later. But we all know not to put incriminating photos of ourselves on Facebook, to make sure that our privacy settings are set up correctly, especially when we're looking for jobs. This has been preached to us, right? With cyber vetting, though, they're not just looking to see what image you're presenting on social networks, but also to make sure that you have a social network presence, right? I'm sure Dan would not have got his job at the Denver Post if he didn't have his own Facebook page or his own Twitter site, right? Even in his bio, it talks about him taking that pastime, right, that distraction in college and turning it into a career. There are certain industries where if you don't have a social networking presence, you will not be considered for those positions, okay? So positions like in the IT industry, if you're not showing that you're involved, in the marketing industry, if you're not showing that you're up on those current trends and you're utilizing the services that are available to us. So the expectation, and that's just going to grow as we move forward. So that's connecting. What about communicating? Okay. 4 points I'd like to make here. First, there are generational differences. Right now we have 4 generations in the workplace, right? We have those individuals who grew up in the World War II era. We have baby boomers. We have Generation Xers. And we have many of you, Generation Y. What it means to communicate is significantly different for each of those generations. The expectations of communication is significantly different for each of those generations. So we've seen some conventions come into play in our communication because of social networks, right? Because of how we tweet, right? 140 words, we become much more terse in our communications with one another. That's read differently by different generations. We have to recognize that in the workforce. And that's going to that divide is going to continue to grow in the next 10 years, right? We'll have a 5th generation coming into the workforce. And we have several people from that older generation not leaving the workforce like we would expect them to, right? We're in turbulent economic times. People are working longer than in the past. And I think it's easy to say that with the advent of technology, older generations must adapt, right? And must learn these new conventions. But I think it's just as important for your generation, for my generation, to look at our communication and say, how can we adapt, right? And to make sure that we are encompassing and that we're being open to making sure everybody is part of the conversation. Second implication for communicating is our identity boundaries. Okay, what is public and what is private? That's going to continue to blur over the next 10 years. So identity scholars have conceptualized that we have a front stage image or a front stage identity and a backstage identity. So if you think of a theater, what occurs in front of the curtain and what occurs behind the curtain. So our public persona and our private persona. Social network sites have blurred these identity boundaries, right? All of a sudden, on Facebook, we are friends with our friends, but we also have professional contacts perhaps on there. Perhaps we're disclosing things we don't need professional contacts to know. The last few weeks, we've seen a surge in reports of employers requesting Facebook passwords, right? Wanting to get on our Facebook sites and learn more about us. That's this blurring. The next 10 years, we're going to start to see some of the legal ramifications of that, I believe. I think we already are starting to see that, and I think the next 10 years will tell us a lot about how we manage that personal, professional divide. So we think about employers that are doing this, what information that they're getting, right, when they're looking at our Facebook pages. They're learning things about our sexual orientation. They're learning about our political views. They're learning about our religious views. They're learning about our marital status. Things that were previously protected information, they now have access to. Is that fair? What can they do with that information? And then for us, that means, how do we craft our identity? What do we put out there? What messages do we want to send? How do we communicate who I am? Third point I'd like to make about communicating is the increased prevalence of virtual teams and what we call anonymous coworkers. People that we don't get to see, that we don't get to meet face to face, that we don't get to learn their little quirks, right? When you work next to someone, when you sit in the cubicle next to them or the office next to them or you share workspace, you learn a lot about them. When we don't do that, when we work virtually, which there are several reasons that we could talk about why virtual work is so wonderful, right? And I'm not speaking against virtual work at all, but we become a little bit more anonymous to our coworkers. And I believe in the next 10 years, organizations are going to figure out ways to utilize social networking to take that anonymity out of it. We find that one of the reasons that we see an increase in incivility in the workplace is because we have more anonymous coworkers. We don't know people as well in the workplace. And I think one of the areas that we're going to look to in the future to create those relationships, and those relationships really help us be productive at the task at hand, we're going to start turning to social networks to see how we can connect people in ways besides just the task. And then finally, the notion of ethical communication. We talked a few minutes ago about the implications of allowing people to see our Facebook profiles. Beyond that, I think there are several ethical implications for organizations using social networking, right? Making sure we're inviting multiple people to the discourses that are going on. We're seeing a bigger digital divide now, right? Not just the generational differences, but socioeconomic differences, right? Cultural differences, how people utilize these new forms of media. And we need to make sure that we're still having multiple voices come to the table. So what does this mean for you? I'd like to advance 3 propositions. The world in which you work in 10 years will first be even more connected than it is today. What does that mean for you? As Dan suggested, that means time management. Being able to filter. Being able to maintain networks without becoming bogged down by them. Being strategic in your networks. Being strategic in what you present to your networks. Number 2, having permeable boundaries. Figuring out what is work-related and what isn't, what is public, what is private, and how do you maintain those differences while still allowing people in, right? While still maintaining those relationships. And finally, over the next 10 years, I think adaptive communication skills will be more important than ever. Okay, and what I mean by adaptive communication skills is making sure that we can communicate across generational boundaries, across cultural boundaries, across socioeconomic boundaries, and really harness the power of social networks to